My name is Odhiambo. It's a very good morning of Friday, 20th month of May. The year is 2022. Join me in the breakfast show. Remember, in the first bit of the breakfast show, as usual, we'll be interacting. Of course, we interact. Just let me know where you are tuned in from, where you are listening from. Of course, where you are able to follow live the breakfast show. From I know there's quite a good number of people who are following through the social media platforms. Remember, all our comment sections are already opened there. Of course, our fan page Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram Pure Africa TV, YouTube Pure Africa TV, Twitter at Pure Africa TV. Remember the hashtag as you tweet is the breakfast show. There I'll be getting your comments in real time, and as we proceed on, of course, I'll be going through the comment section to read some of the comments that I'll be getting there in time. Remember, that would be during the first bit of the show. But getting to the second bit of the show, of course, we'll get to look at some of the top news stories, those that are being regarded as top news stories, of course, those that are given weight, those that are perceived to be more weight than the other. We'll be looking at them. Then later we'll be proceeding to the newspaper review, whereby we'll be looking at various newspapers, of course, in order of sections and subsections. Of course, you remember we love the political section, we love the business section, we love the county section, whereby we'll be looking at some of the stories that are unfolding from our county level and those that transfer from the sub-county level. Of course, even looking at some of the local stories, of course, those that are unfolding from the village level. But remember, during the third and the last bit of this particular show, will be focusing on one subject of discussion, of course, a particular subject of discussion, whereby I'll be gathering some of your comments, of course, your views, your opinions, your ideas, then going through the comment section to see how you react to that. Of course, talking of 20th month of May, the year is 2022. Of course, there's a lot that are unfolding, especially in the world of politics. There's a lot that are unfolding in the world of politics. Of course, we've seen the independent candidates, both the presidential candidates, of course, submit their details, submit their candidatures, and even that for their running mates to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Interestingly, we see there's a big number of independent candidates running for the presidential race, and that which has seen reactions, of course, emerge from different sections of different or departments. Of course, we've even seen some of the publics react to that. Voters have reacted to that. Politicians have reacted to that. But what do you feel? What do you feel? For example, looking at the number of independent candidates who are going for the presidential race, or rather those that have presented, those that have submitted their details to the IEBC, you realize that the number is 40. The biggest number ever of independent presidential candidates that have ever been recorded in the history of Kenya since independence. 40 candidates. But remember, they have not yet reached the last step. Of course, they have to be these particular candidates still have to be vetted through, or rather they have to be vetted through, of course, looking at some relevant departments, or looking at some relevant bodies in relation to their aspiration. For example, the EACC, or rather Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, they must be checked, and at that ground, then we have the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. So these particular candidates must be looked at, or rather must be examined under those relevant bodies before they can actually qualify to get to the ballot, before they can actually registered officially to get to the ballot. Remember, registration of the qualified candidates is scheduled between 25th month of May to the 7th day of the month of June. Of course, the year is 2022. 2022. Then again, we see IEBC is set to meet all the presidential candidates by 23rd month of May. Of course, the year is 2022. So there are just a lot in schedule, especially ahead of the 9th August 2022. But the big question is revolving around the big number of independent candidates. Of course, we've seen the publics react to them. We've seen members of the political class reacting to them. Of course, going by the sentiments of the public, or rather going by the sentiments of the voters, there are those who are buying the opinion that all these candidates should qualify and should be left to get to the ballot, of course, by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. At the same time, there are those who are saying that the candidates, or rather the bigger number of candidates, should be regulated until that smaller number be only a small number will be taken to the ballot. But what do you feel? Do you feel that all the candidates should be allowed, or should be allowed by the IEBC to get to the ballot, irrespective of their bigger number? Or rather, do you feel that the candidate, or that only a small number of the candidates should proceed to the ballot? Remember, there at the ballot, the names of the candidates, or rather, when it comes to voting, the names shall be in order of alphabetical letters. So those with the first alphabetical letters, their names will appear first in that order, respectively. But what do you feel about the bigger number of the independent candidates? Remember, that's what we'll be talking about when we get to the third and the last bit of the show. Of course, I'll be going through the comment sections to see your reactions on that, whether you feel that that all the candidates rather should be given time, or rather should be given that space to get to the ballot, or rather, if you feel that the number should be regulated, or that the bigger number should be regulated further until only a small number of candidates be allowed to the ballot. Of course, that is in the world of politics. In the meanwhile, we see Sonko to be barred from the Mombasa gubernatorial race. That's another story, of course, that we'll be talking about when we get to the second bit of the show in the politics section, the political section. Of course, this comes after court ruling to stop IBC from allowing Sonko to get to the ballot. Those are some of the stories that we'll be looking at deeply when we get to the second bit of the show. Of course, we see also the race for the Mount Kenya vote attraction continues. Of course, yesterday was the fourth day. For the Azimio la Umoja presidential running mate, that is none other than Martha Karua, continuing to campaign in the Mount Kenya region. Meanwhile, we see the Kenya Kwanza team also camping in the Mount Kenya region, of course, ahead of the 9th August general elections, campaigning for DP Ruto and his running mate, that is Honorable Rigathi Gachagua. And so we see there's a lot there's a lot, of course, from the Mount Kenya region as far as the vote attraction is concerned. Remember, now the race is between Rigathi and Karua. The race is now between Rigathi and Karua, especially as far as the votes from the Mount Kenya region are concerned. Of course, going by the terms of the political analysts, I realize that they say that the power of the running mate to these various coalitions, of course, treated as single entities. Look at the Kenya Kwanza, look at Azimio la Umoja, especially vote attraction from the running mate. According to the political analysts, they say it is really vested on the power of the running mate, because of all of them are from the Mount Kenya region. Look at Karua from Kirinyaga County, look at Rigathi Gachagua also from the mountain region. Of course, yesterday we saw Kenya Kwanza camping in Nakuru County, and of course also getting to the Nyandarua County, where the subject of economy was at the center of focus. The subject of economy was at the center of focus, of course, saying this is a time to focus on the economic development, or rather enhancing the Kenya's economy, to see members of the country and other citizens face some favorable economic times. But at the same time, of course, we saw DP talking about the or rather, we saw DP vehemently opposed to the personalized politics, of course, saying them as Kenya Kwanza, of course, they have their politics at the center of human interest, centered at human interest. At the same time, we see Karua continuing to campaign for Azimio in Mount Kenya region, of course, emphasizing on their long-term work experience with the Orange Democratic Movement leader, of course, that is Raila Amolo Odinga, saying that their long-term work experience is enough for them to drive the country to the next, rather to drive the country to in the best way possible. Remember, those are some of the stories that we'll be look at when we get to the second bit of the show, of course. Those that are termed as top news stories, especially in the world of politics. Later, I will be proceeding to the newspapers, whereby we'll be looking at the political section, of course, getting to the business section. And finally, we look at the entertainment, but we'll look at the county section as we'll be proceeding to the third bit of the show. But getting to the third bit of the show, of course, today I'll be asking you, what do you feel about the big number of independent candidates vying for the presidential position, or getting to the presidential position, to the presidential race? Do you feel that the number should be regulated further by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to come up with a small number, or do you feel that they should be given time to proceed to the ballot, then the publics to vote them, or rather so that the public can decide on their fate? Of course, talking of the public, those are the voters. You as a voter, you remember, you are the one to decide their fate, respective of the big number. But what you'll feel about that is, of course, is that which has seen reactions emerge, especially from the voters. Of course, some of them say that the bigger number of the candidates at the ballots likely to bring confusion. Remember, the names shall be appearing there in terms of alphabetical order. Of course, I'll be getting your comments, I'll be getting your views as far as that is concerned when we get to the third and the last bit of the show. My name is Odhiambo. Join me even as we begin officially the first bit of the breakfast show. getting to the second bit of the show, of course, we begin with the top news stories. Those that are given weight. Then later we'll proceed to the newspaper review, of course, looking at the world of politics, looking at what is happening in the business section, and later we'll look at the county section. But before that, let's look at some of the top news stories, of course, those that are given weight in the breakfast show. Of course, we see Sonko to be barred from the Mombasa gubernatorial race. Of course, this comes after a Mombasa court ruling to stop IEBC from allowing Sonko to get, of course, from getting to the ballot. Remember, the issue of course Sonko is that which has been very controversial, of course, since he received the Wiper Party ticket to go for the Mombasa gubernatorial race. Of course, it is that which has been also very chaotic. Remember, the other day Sonko was recording statement at the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, of course, following some of the chaotic scenes during his time, or rather during his visit to Mombasa during that particular time when members of Azimio La Umoja, or rather the Azimio coalition team were having their campaigns in Mombasa. Of course, we saw Sonko recording a statement to the Directorate of Criminal Investigation. Of course, so the issue of Sonko's to getting to the Mombasa gubernatorial race is that which has been very chaotic since the time he received the Wiper Party ticket to go for the Mombasa gubernatorial race. Of course, we see according to the law, he should not be allowed to serve in any public office. Of course, that was according to the statement by the DPP, or rather Director of Public Prosecution, Nordin Haji, of course, the other day in Mombasa County, responding to that. Remember, Sonko was impeached in the year of 2020 from Nairobi governor's office, where he was serving as the governor of the Nairobi City county. And so those are some of the cases, of course, looking at the impeachment allegations, of course, the corruption scandals there, and even the misuse of the public office, among many others. And so according to the DPP, Nordin Haji, of course, reacting to the Sonko's case the other day, saying that he should not be allowed to serve in any public office, should not be allowed to serve in any public office, of course, following the fact that, or rather considering the fact that he still has a lot of pending cases in court. But remember, Sonko is just one of the many leaders, or rather one of the many leaders who have pending court cases, and yet they are showing interest to get to public offices. They are showing interest to get to elective positions. Remember, you can also share your comments on that. Of course, what do you feel about leaders who have pending corruption cases, or rather pending cases in court, yet not cleared, but at the same time they are showing interest to get to public offices, showing interest to get to elective positions, of course, to be voted in by the Kenyan citizens, of course, who are the voters. And so Sonko is to wait. Until the final ruling on that is to be made. Of course, the other day, also with the governor, or with the former Kiambu governor, of course, Ferdinand Waititu, we saw them, of course, proposing that such cases should be heard, or rather should be responded to now by the Chief Justice Martha Koome the other day through some of the judges. But let's wait and see, of course, what is likely to unfold from there. Meanwhile, as we talk, is still barred from that until the final ruling on that will be made again. Meanwhile, we see the raise of the Mount Kenya is on, of course, the Kenya Kwanza coalition, the Azimio La Umoja also teaming up campaign in Mount Kenya region, of course, ahead of the attraction of votes from Mount Kenya region. Remember, Mount Kenya region is that particular region that has a lot of interest, of course, being treated as one of the major regions with a lot of votes. And so we see the two coalitions now campaigning thoroughly in Mount Kenya region to attract vote. But now the war is between the running mates for both coalitions. Of course, we see those going by the terms of the political analysts. Of course, we see they are saying that the much of the influence will come from the running mates, both for Azimio la Umoja coalition and for the Kenya Kwanza coalition. Of course, looking at Azimio la Umoja, we see the running mate to ODM leader Raila Amolo Odinga, of course, that is Martha Karua, now teaming up campaign. Remember, she began immediately a day after being appointed as the running mate for Raila Amolo Odinga, whereby she managed to get to Kirinyaga County, of course, later to Meru County. Yesterday, we saw her in Chuka County, and so the race is still going on. Meanwhile, the opponents of the Kenya Kwanza coalition are also teaming up in Mount Kenya region. Of course, yesterday we saw DP and the entire Kenya Kwanza team camping in Nakuru County, of course, also getting to Nyandarua County, of course, campaigning ahead of the 9th August 2022 general election. Of course, we saw the Kenya Kwanza Brigade Nakuru, led by the Deputy President William Ruto, who is also the flag bearer, also the presidential flag bearer for Kenya Kwanza coalition. Of course, also there was the running mate to DP Ruto, running mate to the Deputy President William Ruto, is the flag bearer for the Kenya Kwanza. Of course, we saw Rigathi Gachagua also there. Of course, centering on the subject of economy, was at the center of the Kenya Kwanza campaign in the mountain region. Of course, saying they are strategizing on how to enhance the economy of the country, of course, to ensure that Kenyans do not continue to suffer, of course, at various levels, ensuring that the businesses and small-scale businesses of some of the publics or other citizens are upheld, so that they can as well afford some of the basic necessities, afford the basic living. Of course, also saw them, of course, enhancing living standards of Kenyans to better the economy. Of course, we also saw DP Ruto mentioning unhealthy, of course, vehemently opposed to personality politics, of course, drawing that, rather relating that to their opponents in Azimio la Umoja, relating that to their opponents in Azimio la Umoja. Of course, saying that the Kenya Kwanza politics is centered on is people-centered, of course, centered at the interest of people, that which is centered in bringing a lot of developments in as far as the economy of the country is concerned. Of course, we also saw ANC party leader, or the Amani National Congress party leader Musalia Mudavadi also react to the long time of silence, of course, of President Uhuru Kenyatta. Remember, this is yet another subject that has been seen reactions, of course, emerge from the political class and from the members of the public who are voters, considering that initially President Uhuru Kenyatta was very vocal as far as Azimio la Umoja campaigns are concerned. Of course, he would even attend some of the public rallies or some of the public campaigns for Azimio la Umoja, but for some time he has been very silent. He has been very silent as far as the Azimio campaigns are considered. Of course, that which has been receiving reactions, of course, it has been reacted to by different members, of course, from the political class. We saw Mudavadi, with the ANC party leader, also reacting on the same, of course, saying that that particular silence could be a sign of President Uhuru Kenyatta quitting Azimio, of course. But remember, to challenge that, we saw the Jubilee Party chairman David Murad reacting to that just a day before yesterday, saying that the Azimio is intact. Of course, President Uhuru Kenyatta is still within Azimio, but rather just taking a short break to leave Raila Amolo Odinga rather to campaign, but again reiterated on by the Kieni member of Parliament Kanini Kega, who said that soon President Uhuru Kenyatta will be back to Azimio politics at the right time. Remember, it is also a subject that is very controversial, of course, very debatable, as others say that if President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, is a Kenyan citizen as well as a voter who has the freedom to stand with whoever candidates he feels is interested in, why can't he wait until the right time for voting is when he can actually involved in voting. Meanwhile, there's another section of people, of course, were saying that nothing wrong with President Uhuru Kenyatta getting to Azimio politics, or rather campaigning publicly for the ODM party leader Raila Amolo Odinga. Remember, the term of silence, or rather the silence of the president on Azimio politics, is that which has been taken as an advantage, of course, by the opponents from the Kenya Kwanza, by their opponents from Kenya Kwanza. Of course, we saw yesterday Musalia Mudavadi terming it at a slow retreat from Azimio la Umoja, or rather a slow motion quit from Azimio la Umoja. Of course, also reiterating on the tough times for Karua ahead of Mount Kenya vote traction. Of course, members of the Kenya Kwanza, especially characterized by their campaigns in the Mount Kenya region, we've seen them count on the stronghold of their running mate, or rather the presidential running mate to the Kenya Kwanza presidential flag bearer, of course, that is Rigathi Gachagua. We've seen members of the Kenya Kwanza coalition, of course, counting on the strength of Rigathi Gachagua, especially in the mountain region, in comparison to the strength of the Azimio la Umoja's presidential running mate, of course, that is Martha Karua. Remember, according to the political analysts, the strength of the running mate is what will determine a lot of votes, especially from the Mount Kenya region. They are also considering that both the two running mates are from the mountain region, so the one that will show a lot of strength, especially from the Mount Kenya region, is likely to attract more voters from the mountain region. Of course, we've seen campaigns moving forward, going ahead, especially in the mountain region. Of course, the issue of vote attraction for women is also mentioned. Of course, going by the analysis of the opinion polls by the various political analysis and the various political visionaries, of course, they're saying that Martha Karua is likely to attract more votes, especially from the female gender. That is also mentioned, considering that she is the first female presidential running mate, of course, or rather the first woman presidential running mate in Kenya since independence. Of course, a move that was positively welcomed, or warmly welcomed by a section of women who, of course, applauded Raila Amolo Odinga, rather congratulated Raila Odinga for making such a wise decision to pick a woman running mate, that which they perceive to be just a step to seeing women empowered, of course, in the political world, or rather in other developmental projects. Of course, the pick of Karua is perceived by women to be an uplift of the female gender, that which is said that is likely to attract more votes from the female gender, or rather from women, to get to the Azimio ballot. of course, on 9th of August 2022. Of course, we see Karua continuing to campaign, or rather to continue to campaign for Azimio la Umoja Oka coalition, of course, in Mount Kenya region. Yesterday, basing our campaigns in Chuka, of course, in Tharaka Nithi County, of course, counting on their long record of work experience with Raila, that which is a show that they have enough experience to try to drive the country, especially should Azimio, or rather should Azimio form the next government after the election. Of course, the issue of water mentioned and infrastructure, some of their contributions with Odinga, or rather some of their contributions with Odinga respectively, water and infrastructure for a long time. Of also mentioning of their long time work experience, that which is likely to see the country move forward. Of course, the issue of corruption, saying that they should they get to the government, then corruption cases will be a forgotten story. That should they get their corruption cases, corruption cases will be a foregone story, or rather story of the past. Of course, we saw Karua also promising on enhancing human rights upon entry to government, or rather should Azimio form the next government, human rights will be highly upheld. Of course, those are according to the sentiments of Martha Karua, who is the Azimio la Umoja presidential running mate. Azimio la Umoja presidential running mate, of course, when she was campaigning the Mount Kenya region. Remember, Karua also stood out to condemn the Kenya Kwanza leaders, or to condemn some of the Kenya Kwanza leaders, of course, who she perceived to have incited some of the road youths, of course, those that tried to, of course, interfere with her campaigns, especially in Kirinyaga County, some parts of the Kirinyaga County. Of course, we saw a section of some youth, of course, shouting Ruto at a time that Karua was campaigning for Azimio la Umoja. Yesterday we saw Karua, of course, standing to oppose that particular incident, of course, vehemently saying that could be a sign of leaders who lack direction. Of course, mobilizing some road youths, or rather inciting youths to get to interfere with their opponents' politics, or rather with their opponents' campaign. Of course, terming that as lack of direction by their opponents from the Kenya Kwanza. Of course, remember, this was perceived, this particular interference was perceived to be well choreographed, of course, by their Kenya Kwanza counterparts, saying there's a sign of lack of political direction. Of course, we also saw Karua urging the youth to desist from being, or rather to avoid accepting being used by politicians, especially to spur violence, rather to interfere with their opponents' political campaigns, saying that that's not the best way of using the youth. Of course, saying that the youth should not as well accept to be used by some of the politicians who want to spur violence, especially ahead of the 9th August general elections. Ahead of the 9th August general election. Then again, we see Kenyans react on the higher number of presidential independent candidates. So Kenyans now react to the bigger number of independent presidential candidates. Remember, to be exact, there are 40 candidates, of course, eyeing the presidential position, of course, under independent tickets, under their respective independent tickets. 40 candidates going as independent candidates, of course, according to the submissions made to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. Of course, to total, then again, there are other candidates, of course, going under the various coalitions ticket, then there are those under various political parties ticket, totaling to 56 presidential candidates. Of course, that is according to the statement that was signed by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission chairperson and the chairman Wafula Chebukati. But we see a lot of focus is on the independent candidates, especially those that are eyeing the presidential position. Of course, we've seen voters react to that. We've seen the members of the public react to that. But what do you feel about that? Remember, this is not the last stage for that. This is not the last stage, or rather, it does not mean that all these 40s are already guaranteed to getting to the ballot. Remember, there's some of the steps that they need to pass through is when those will be qualified to get to the ballot. Meanwhile, those who will be regulated, looking at the barriers, looking at some of the grounds that they'll be checked at. Of course, remember some of the grounds and some of the relevant bodies that they must be vetted, and of course the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, then Directorate of Criminal Investigations, among other relevant bodies. But remember, soon after they'll be vetted, and under those relevant bodies, then those who shall have qualified then will get to the ballot. But what do you feel even before they are scrutinized under those, or rather before they are examined under those particular bodies? What do you feel? Do you feel that they should be regulated further by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission before they should be regulated further by the IEBC to come up with a smaller number, or rather do you feel that all of them should get chance to get to the ballot and to be voted in by the Kenyan citizens? Of course, those who are the voters also to be voted in by the voters, so that their fate be decided by the Kenyan voters. Do you feel that the number should be regulated further, or do you feel that they should be allowed to get to the ballot, then the voters to decide their fate? Of course, remember, you can share with us your opinions on that, your viewpoints, of course, your comments. You can drop them via our various comment platforms. Of course, our fan page, you following through our social media platforms. Our fan page, Facebook is Pure Africa TV, Instagram is Pure Africa TV, YouTube is Pure Africa TV. You tweeting, remember you can tweet at Pure Africa TV. Hashtag is the breakfast show. I'll be getting your tweets, I'll be getting your comments, I'll be getting your views. Remember, you following through your television screens, of course, those who are using the free-to-air satellite decoders, you can as well drop your comment via our official WhatsApp number. The number is 079684 0796840560. There I'll be getting your comment. Of course, getting to the third and the last bit of this particular show, of course, I'll be going through the comment section to see your comment on that. Of course, today we are talking about that. So getting to the third and the last bit of the show, I'll be getting the comments. Remember, we are talking about the bigger number of the independent candidates, of course, those that are eyeing the topmost political position, of course, the presidential post. You realize that 40 in number, to be exact, 40 of them have made their submissions to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But remember, it's not a guarantee that all these 40s will go even after making their submission. It is not a guarantee that all of them will get to the ballot. Of course, there are some grounds that they need to be examined or under before they can be qualified to get to the ballot. Of course, some of the grounds or some of the bodies that they need to be checked in under some of them are EACC, of course, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We have the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, among other relevant bodies. Remember, registration of qualified candidates is scheduled to be between 25th day of the month of May to 7th day of the month of June. Of course, to the year is 2022. Then NIBC set to meet all the presidential candidates, of course, those that all the presidential candidates, both those vying, or rather those going as independent candidates, those going under the various political coalitions, and those that are more going under various political parties ticket. They are all set to meet the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, of course, that will be on 23rd May. That will be on 23rd May, 23rd of the month, the 23rd day of the month of May, 2022, of course, at Bomas of Kenya, that is in Nairobi. Remember, all these are preparations that are geared towards the general elections, of course, for the year 2022. Remember, the general election is not far. Now, less than 84 days remaining to the general elections. Of course, those are some of the strategies, or rather, those are some of the strategies and preparations ahead of the general election. Remember, officially campaigns are set to begin as from next week, But what's your opinion on the big number of independent candidates? Should they all get chance to proceed to the ballot, so that their fate be decided by the Kenyan citizens who are the voters, or rather should they be regulated further so that only a small number of the candidates get to the ballot? Of course, we've seen Kenyans react to this. We've seen the members of the public, of course, voters also react to this, especially on the subject of confusion. Of course, some of the voters say that this could be this is likely to cause confusion, especially in the ballot. Some of them say this is likely to cause confusion in the ballot, owing to the bigger number of candidates, of course, the presidential candidates at the ballot. Meanwhile, there are those who are saying that all of them should be allowed to get to the ballot, so that the public, who are the voters, can decide the fate of them. But what do you think about it? Remember, you can drop your comments via our various comments platforms. Of course, our WhatsApp number, official WhatsApp number is 0796840560. There I'll be getting your comment in real time. Of course, getting to the third and the last bit of the show, I'll be gathering some of the comments, of course, to read them, as we'll be calling it a breakfast show. Thank you very much for continuing to stay with me. I'm taking a very short break. Coming later, we are now getting to the newspapers, of course, whereby we'll be reviewing newspapers, beginning with the political section. Then later we'll be getting to the business section, and finally getting to the county section. My name is Odhiambo. This is the breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV. Continue staying with me. In a short while, I'll be back with much more. we get to the newspaper review, of course, this is the second bit of this particular show, because the breakfast show live from Pure Africa TV. Now we're getting to the newspaper review, of course, beginning with the world of politics, or rather the political section. Then later we'll be getting to the county section, and finally as we get to the business section, looking at the front page, of course, this is a Star newspaper. Ruto battles Raila Karua in Mount Kenya. Of course, the subject of campaigns, especially for the Mount Kenya region, rather campaigns from the Mount Kenya region, is that which is given a lot of emphasis today, of course, bearing in mind, rather considering that the two coalitions, of course, have been centering on Mount Kenya region, or rather they have been camping their campaigns in the Mount Kenya regions, of course, ahead of the 9th August 2022 general elections. We've seen the Kenya Kwanza team yesterday in Nakuru County and in Nyandarua County. At the same time, we've seen the running mate to Azimio la Umoja presidential flag bearer, of course, that is Martha Karua, also campaigning for the Azimio team in Mount Kenya region, of course, accompanied by those by some other close allies of Raila Amolo Odinga, or rather those that are also allied to the Azimio la Umoja. Ruto battles Raila Karua in Mount Kenya region. Of course, Karua has hit the campaign trail in rigorous schedule since she was named deputy. Remember, today is the fourth day, today is the fifth day, and when after Karua was named the deputy president, or rather the deputy, or rather the running mate to the presidential flag bearer of the Azimio la Umoja, of course, Raila Amolo Odinga. But since that day, we've seen Karua actively involved in political campaigns, especially centering in Mount Kenya region. Remember, Mount Kenya region is attracting a lot of political campaigners, especially due to the fact that there's a lot of votes in Mount Kenya region. At the same time, we see members of the Kenya Kwanza also team up in Mount Kenya region. On Mount Kenya region, of course, the strength the strength is being weighed between Karua and Gachagua now, even as far as the Mount Kenya votes are concerned. Moving forward to the next story, of course, we see DCI and Musk dark life of suspected thug Muvot. Of course, that's a story that is given coverage. You see now the DCI now set to unmask the life of the suspected thug. So a story that is given coverage under that particular section. Moving forward, of course, looking at most of the stories, especially in the political section, we see a lot of opinion polls. Are of course captured under the political section. Of course, some of the regions where some of the regions where Kenya Kwanza is popular than Azimio. At the same time, some of the regions where Azimio is popular than the Kenya Kwanza. Of course, those are some of the opinion polls that are given weight under the political section. Of course, Mount Kenya, looking at the Mount Kenya region, the highly competitive Mount Kenya region, or rather the highly competed for Mount Kenya region, we see Kenya Kwanza is slightly ahead of the Azimio la Umoja as far as the opinion polls are concerned. Of course, moving forward, we see Ruto's big battle to undo Karua factor in Mount Kenya. And so Mount Kenya has been that with a lot of interest, of course, especially going by the recent campaigns. Ruto factor, Ruto's big battle to undo Karua factor in central region. Of course, this is revolved around other than this is considering the choice of Madeira Member of Parliament Rigathi Gachagua as the DP's running mate, of course, ahead of the 9th August polls. Ahead of the 9th August polls. The same time, moving forward to the next story, of course, we see Sonko remains upbeat as court blocks IEBC from clearing him. Of course, that is also another story that was captured under the top news stories when we began the second bit of the show. But still under the political section, Sonko remains upbeat as court blocks Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission from clearing him. Remember that was this was the Mombasa court that blocked the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission from clearing the former governor to Nairobi City County, of course, Mike Mbuvi Sonko, because of this, because of several cases that are still said to be pending in court, and yet is showing interest to get political position, or rather to get to public offices, of course, according to the law, or rather going by the statements of the DPP Nordin Haji, that a person or rather an individual with such cases that are still pending should not be allowed, of course, according to the law, to serve in any public offices. So Sonko is not left out. We've seen the Mombasa court now ruling that the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission should stop clearing Sonko to get to the ballot. And so the former is set to continue to wait. Of course, we see another hurdle has been placed in the path of the former Nairobi governor Mike Sonko in his quest for the Mombasa governor seat. Of course, the High Court in Mombasa on Wednesday issued interim orders stopping the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission from proceeding to clear Sonko's nomination papers. At the same time, we see Justice John Mativo saying that the IBC should not clear the politician pending the hearing and determination of a petition, of course, filed by the three civil society organizations against his candidature. Of course, the candidature for Mike Mbuvi Sonko, of course, ahead of the Mombasa gubernatorial race, is that which has been very chaotic, of course, being reacted to by various sections. Under the certificate of agency filed on 16th of May, of course, we see Akietu Kituo cha Sheria and Transparency International now want the court to declare Sonko was impeached in 2022, of course, by 2020, sorry, unfit to hold the office. Of course, Mativo said he will give direction on hearing on the application and petition on 24th of May. And so the former Nairobi governor is now set to wait until the fate for that will be decided at the right time. Moving forward to the next story, of course, we see Ruto Gachagua who Nakuru voters with a basket of goodies. Of course, that's a story that is also given coverage under the political section. Of course, we see now Ruto Gachagua now who Nakuru voters with the basket of goodies. Remember, yesterday the duo were camping at Nakuru County, or rather the duo had their campaigns in Nakuru County, of course, ahead of the 9th August general election. Of course, we've seen the Deputy President William Ruto and his running mate Rigathi Gachagua now took their vote to the Ant Mission to Nakuru with a bag of goodies, including a cabinet slot. Of course, Ruto said the county, which has more than 1 million registered voters, has always been forgotten after election. Of course, giving the Nakuru residents yet another promise, especially should Kenya Kwanza form the next government, rather should Deputy President William Ruto clinch to the topmost seat to become the fifth president of the Republic of Kenya. Of course, a term that was positively or warmly received by the residents of Nakuru. Of course, now showing the optimism that should DP get there, then they're likely to take part, or rather they are likely to get positions in the Kenya Kwanza government. Of course, he said, and I quote, Nakuru is always forgotten because people do not know whether to place it in the Rift Valley or Mount Kenya. This year, Nakuru will disappear in the middle. End of the quote. Of course, those were some of the sentiments of the Deputy President William Ruto. Of course, speaking during a Kenya Kwanza Economic Forum in Nakuru County, we saw Ruto saying focus on his government will be to uplift the lives of the common people and not amend the constitution. Remember this sentiment that has been said over and over, especially it has been characterizing the campaigns of the Kenya Kwanza in various regions, in various counties. Of course, they're saying the focus is on economy rather than the constitution. Remember the other day, DP was vehemently against the bit that was vehemently opposed to the bit of constitutional amendment. Of course, as talked about by Martha Karua, who is the running mate to the ODM, who is the running mate to Azimio la Umoja presidential flag bearer, especially when Karua said that the constitution would be checked, but in reference to the law, or in reference to the law, a statement that was vehemently condemned by Deputy President William Ruto, is the Kenya Kwanza presidential flag bearer, saying now it's a time that the country need to focus on economic development. The country now needs to focus on uplifting the lives of the Kenyan citizens, so the voters, at the expense of focusing on the constitutional change, at the expense of focusing on the constitutional amendment. Of course, those are some of the stories that unfolded and characterized the Kenya Kwanza campaign in Nakuru County yesterday. The same time, you see former MP behind propaganda will be nominated. That's a story that is also given coverage under that particular section. But now we are getting to the business section. But before we get to the business section, of course, I would still remind you on the subject of story today, or rather the subject of discussion today. Remember, today we are looking at the bigger number of independent candidates. Of course, those that are going under independent tickets, those that are eyeing the topmost position, of course, the presidential position. Of course, that which has seen reactions emerge from the political class, that has seen reactions emerge even from the publics, of course, who are voters. Of course, others say that the bigger number of independent candidates, or that the bigger number of presidential candidates who are likely to get to the ballot is likely to cause confusion, especially for the Kenyan voters, or rather for the voters. But what do you feel about it? Remember, it's not yet guaranteed that all the 40 independent candidates are likely to go. But looking at the total number, it's 56. Of course, the independent candidates are included there. Those that are going under party tickets are included there, and those that are going under coalition's ticket. But remember, there are some other grounds these particular candidates will be checked at. These particular candidates will be examined at before they can actually be qualified to get to the ballot, or rather before they can actually be guaranteed to get to the ballot. But meanwhile, considering the big number is still going by the look of the big number, it's still likely that many candidates, or the bigger number of candidates, will get to the ballot. But what's your feeling? What's your thought? What's your views as far as that is concerned? Are you also buying of the opinion, of course, that they should be regulated further, so that only a small number of candidates be allowed to get to the ballot? Rather, do you feel that they should be allowed to get to the ballot? Then you decide their fate. You as a Kenyan citizen, of course, you as vote. Of course, there are those who have been reacting to that, to this particular point, of course, saying that the IEBC should regulate them further until only a small number of candidates be allowed to get to the ballot. At the same time, there are those who are buying the opinion that they should be left to get to the ballot so that their fate be decided by the voters. But what do you think about that? Remember, you can drop your comments via our comment sections, or rather our comment platforms. So remember, are you following through the Pure Africa TV official app? You can drop your comment there at our comment section. Of course, I'll be getting it in real time. Of course, getting to the third and the last bit of the show, I'll be reading some of the comments, especially as far as the subject of discussion today is concerned, in the third and the last bit of the show. You following through our social media platforms. Remember, our fan page Facebook is Pure Africa TV. Of course, we are live at Facebook. Even right now, you can drop your comment there. Of course, we'll be getting it. And getting to the third and the last bit of the show, I'll be gathering some of the comments, of course, to go through them, especially considering the subject of discussion today, as we talk about the issue of the big number of presidential candidates that are likely to get to the ballot come 9th of August 2022. Of course, you following through your screens, of course, those using the free to air satellite decoders. Remember, you can drop your comment to participate, of course, via our official WhatsApp number. The number is 0796 840560. There I'll be getting your comment, of course, getting the third and the last bit of the show. I'll be going through the various comment sections of various comment platforms to gather some of the comments on that. Now, I'm taking a very short break. Coming next, we'll be getting to the business section, later to the county section. Continue staying with me. A very short break coming next. I'll be back with much more. look at some of the stories that are captured on the business section. Of course, those that are given weight. Looking at the business section, of course, we see fresh COVID funds audit to be out by next month. Of course, that's a statement by Gathung. Of course, Kenyans will next month know how exactly COVID-19 funds were utilized, or rather were spent. Of course, this is a statement from the Auditor General Nancy Gathungu, who of course said that amid speculations over the use of donor funds and credit extended to the government. And so by next month, Kenyans are likely to know how the COVID-19 funds were utilized. Of course, that is according to the Auditor General. That particular information is from the Auditor General's office, of course, Nancy Githungu. Moving forward, we see the auditor has given our officers up to the end of this month, of course, 12 days from today, to finalize scrutiny both the national and the county governments levels, of course, so that the public, so that it can be made transparent to the public how the COVID-19 funds were utilized and how they were spent. Of course, that's a story that is given coverage. She said the focus is on the vaccine rollout, where most of the expenditure was channeled. Of course, the fresh audit was called by the International Monetary Fund, or rather IMF, after the exposure of alleged graft at Kenya Medical Suppliers Agency, or rather KEMSA. And so by next month, Kenyans will be expecting to know how the funds, how the COVID-19 funds were used. Of course, that is to be released in a span of next month. Moving forward to the next story, of course, under the business section, we see Nakuru City hit by acute fertilizers shortage. Of course, the issue of shortage of fertilizers has been on the rise, of course, especially going by the general increase, or rather going by the general increase in the prices of various commodities. Remember the other day the issue of animal feeds was on the rise again, but today we see a lot of focus on the issue of fertilizers and other farm chemicals and inputs on the rise, especially in Nakuru County, Nakuru County. Then moving forward to the next story, of course, we see the International Monetary Fund now calls for open trade financing to cushion poor states from food crisis. Of course, this could be as a result of the hype, or rather as a result of increased prices of various commodities. Now the International Monetary Fund has called for open trade to cushion poor states from food crisis, Of course, the International Monetary Fund is now too much concerned that there is an impending food crisis unless global trade remains open and support for the vulnerable households increase. Of course, it is also calling for sufficient agricultural supply and addressing the financial pressure to mitigate the food crisis. Of course, the IMF says Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused serious economic and social consequences, with many countries now facing dangerous food shortage, sharply higher prices of food, energy, and fertilizers. Of course, all these are likely to be related to the Russia-Ukraine war, that which is being perceived which is perceived to have led to high increase, or rather to have led to increase of various increase in the prices of various commodities, of course, food commodities, fertilizers, and other farm and chemical inputs also mentioned. Of course, those are some of the stories that are given coverage under the business section. Those are some of the stories, of course, that are given coverage under the business section. Then we see auditor. Now, once government's accounts are set recourse ahead of the election, of course, also captured under that political under the business section. We see the auditor general now wants public assets and finances well accounted for ahead of the 9th August 2022 general election, of course, saying this will be a smooth transition at the national and county levels, especially ahead of the general elections. Of course, the state audit also wants all outgoing accounting officers and ministries, departments, and agencies and county governments to ensure they clear all pending bills and keep the paper records, especially to be done before general elections. Of course, she also said that our office will audit public assets and the government's accounts and to ensure proper handing over to the incoming regimes. Of course, setting a clear record so that those that will be getting to such offices get a clear record of the past transactions, that they begin from transparent transactions, of course, clear record shown, so that even those will be exiting, or rather those will be quitting such offices, to give back clear records that they may not be followed then soon after getting out of such offices. Those are some of the stories, of course, that are given coverage under the business section. But now let's switch gears and look at what is there in the county section. Meanwhile, continue dropping your comments, continue tweeting. Of course, remember, you tweeting hashtag is the breakfast show, Twitter at Pure Africa TV. At the same time, you can drop your comment via our official WhatsApp number. Of course, the number is 0796840560, especially considering the subject of discussion today. Of course, today we are talking about the big number of presidential candidates that are likely to get to the ballot. Of course, we've seen the public react to that. Of course, there are those who say that the bigger the number, the more the confusion, especially on the side of the voters. Meanwhile, there are those who are buying of the opinion that all the candidates should be given time, or rather should be given chance to get to the ballot, so that their fate be decided by the Kenyan citizens, of course, those who are the voters. But what do you feel about? What do you think about it? What's your opinion about it? Of course, what's your reaction to that? Remember, you can drop your comments via our various comment platforms. Of course, social platforms are there. Remember, our fan page Facebook is Pure Africa TV, YouTube Pure Africa TV. At the same time, you can use our official WhatsApp number as well. You can drop your comment via our Pure Africa TV official app, especially you following through the PA TV official app. Looking at the county section now, looking at the county section, we see a missing breadwinner now found dead in insecurity dogs in CI. Of course, missing breadwinner now found dead as insecurity dogs in CI County. Of course, the county section today, of course, has begun with the featuring of a very sad story from Siaya County. Siaya County, of course, a breadwinner who went missing in Bondo Town, Siaya County, has been found dead. Of course, Salim Amolo Opany, aged at 28 years, went missing on the night of Wednesday after 11 Wednesday. Now his body was discovered 2 days later at the Bondo Sub-County Hospital mortuary. Of course, Opany lived in Bondo Town. There he worked as a bread vendor for a retail shop owner. He also operated as a motorbike belonging to the same entrepreneur. Of course, This now calls upon the interiors. This now calls upon the ministries for all departments for security and interior cabinet ministry, of course, to look into the security matters. Of course, this is not the first time with such cases of abductions, cases of missing, and even killings have been all over, especially from the North Rift, but now is even proceeding through the Nyanza region, of course, Siaya County. Of course, moving forward to the next story, we see Nairobi County also captured. Nairobians now face decisive moment, face decisive moment in a wake of unkept pledges. Of course, these are from the politicians. These are from the politicians. You realize during the political campaigns, there are a lot of pledges. Of course, those that are given the promises of heaven and earth. But the big question is, are they fulfilled? There are a lot of pledges. There are a lot of promises, especially characterizing political rallies, especially during campaigns. But now the big question, are they fulfilled? Are they actually actualized, or are they made to reality? Now we see that Nairobi residents have, in every election here, been taken on a roller coaster of empty promises. Politicians sell their manifestos to the electorate, but of course the season of empty promises is here once again, as politicians move door to door to woo voters ahead of the 9th August 2022 general elections. Of course, a good number of them are seeking re-elections with little or nothing to show in terms of the campaign promises they made in the last election cycle. Of course, this is now to be decided by the Kenyan citizen, of course, by you as a voter to decide their fate. Of course, there are those who are seeking to be re-elected to those political offices, but go through their record of works, especially for the last period of, or for the last period they have been in that office. Do they have something to account for, or rather, especially those that have been in those offices, do they have something to account for, or rather, do they want to begin fresh? It is you to look at, or it is you, of course, to look at those particular contestants. You as a voter to look at those particular contestants. You as a voter to look at those politicians as far as various grounds are concerned. Of course, you can look at the record of work, especially those that have been to offices. At the same time, there are those who are getting to the offices for the first time. Of course, you as a voter, you are the one to decide their face. Of course, each and every time. Of course, in some of the regions, we've seen each and every time after general elections, Kenyans cry, I wish I knew, I would not vote, and so and so. But remember, the time is now. It is you to look at them, or rather to scrutinize them as far as various grounds are concerned, for you to come up with the best leader, or rather with the best leader suitable for that office ahead of the 9th August of 2022 general elections. Of course, we see now the residents of Nairobi now reacting to that, especially terming them empty promises each and every time general election is nearing. Promises that go unfulfilled, promises that go unfulfilled. Moving forward to the next story, of course, you see, we will all die, says starving Turkana residents. Of course, another crisis in Turkana County, disaster has hit Turkana County. Residents now say we will all die. Of course, the starving Turkana residents have said. That's a story that is also captured. Of course, Turkana County mentioned in 46 years, Mary Loreji has never been seen a drought that has lasted 3 years. Of course, for the first time, this particular resident of Turkana County is now seeing a drought lasting for 3 years, lasting continuously for 3 years. Of course, the drought has wiped out water sources and pastures. The northern part of Kenya have received less than 30% of the normal rainfall, the worst record in decades, of course, in the last 3 years. Of course, looking at Turkana County, we see livestock, which the pastoralist communities depend on for livelihood, are emaciated and dying indoors. Of course, the Turkana government has also said at least 640,000 people are in dire need of food. Turkana County also captured under the county level, of course, a total starvation occasioned by continuous drought for 3 years in Turkana County. Those are some of the questions. Those are some of the stories, and finally, you see, ensure all KCP candidates transit to secondary. Of course, parents told, that's the last story that is also captured under this particular section. Of course, the county's section. Now, parents are told that to ensure that all KCP candidates transit to secondary schools. Of course, Vihiga parents are told this from the Vihiga county. The government won't spare parents who are not taking their kids to school in this 100% transition. Of course, period. Luanda Sub-County Deputy County Commissioner County Benson Aludo has warned, especially the residents of Vihiga County, that very staunch actions will be taken against the parents, or very strong lawful actions will be taken against parents who are still staying with their children at home, despite trying to avoid the fact of the 100% transition. Now saying that any parent that will be found culpable of having their children at home to the expense of 100% transition will face very strong actions. Of course, of the law, will face the wrath of the law. We see the DCC was addressing the press at his office in Luanda Sub-County headquarters while flagging of Elimu scholarship beneficiaries in Luanda and Emuhaya Sub-County. Of course, said no parent should complain about school fees, as there are several organizations that have come on board to help learners countrywide. And so, according to him, the issue of school fees should not be an excuse, but rather all the parents should see that all the children are taken to school. All children are taken to school, especially going by the 100% transition. All those that have sat for their KCPE examination, all to transit to the next level of education, because that is the secondary level of education. Those are some of the stories that were given coverage under the county section. But now I'm taking a very short break. Coming late next, we'll be getting to the third and the last bit of the breakfast show. Of course, that particular bit, I'll be gathering your comments, especially your comments, views, and of course feelings as far as the subject of discussion today is considered. Remember, today we are talking about the issue of the big number of candidates, of course, that are likely to get to the ballot, especially the presidential candidates. Remember, we have 40 independent candidates that have already made their submissions to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. At the same time, we have candidates who are getting to who have made their submissions, of course, with various political parties' tickets. Yet again, there are those who have made their submissions and different political coalitions ticket, totaling to 56 candidates, of course, that have made their submission ahead of the 9th August general elections, of course, for the presidential position. But a lot of focus, especially going by the sentiments of the public, a lot of focus has been made to the independent candidates as we speak. 40 of them have made their submissions to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But remember, that is not the guarantee that they will all proceed to get to the ballot. Remember, they have to be examined yet again, looking at various grounds, of course, looking at various bodies that are related to see them qualified, and guaranteed to get to the ballots. Of course, they have to be examined, or to be examined via some of the grounds, of course, like the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the DCI, or rather Directorate of Criminal Investigations, among other relevant bodies, before they can actually be qualified to get to the ballot. But even before that, we've seen Kenyans react to the big number of independent candidates. Of course, some of them are saying that they should be regulated further by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, so that they don't get so that only a small number get to the ballot. At the same time, we've seen a section, of course, saying that all the big, or rather, despite of the number, they should be left, or rather they should be allowed to get to the ballot, that the public, that the voters decide their fate. But what do you think about that? Of course, you can as well share your opinion, you can as well share your views, you can as well share your viewpoint. Remember, you can drop your comments via official WhatsApp number. The number is 0796840560. They will be getting your comments. At the same time, remember, you can drop your comments via our social media platforms. Of course, after the break, I'll be back to look at various comment sections, of course, to see your reactions on that. Continue staying with me. I'm taking a very short break. Coming next, I'll be reading some of the comments as we call it a breakfast show. Continue staying tuned. third and the last bit of the show, of course, this particular time. I just want to go through the comment section to see some of the reactions, especially in consideration to the topic of the in consideration to the topic of discussion, of course, that we've been talking about today. Of course, the issue of the bigger number of running mate. Of course, going through the comment section, I see a lot of comments, but I'll just pick a few of them. Of course, I see Ronald is saying all the candidates should be allowed to the ballot, of course, so that wananchi to decide. Thank you very much. Of course, that's a comment. At the same time, moving forward, I see Rhoda saying that the bigger number is likely to cause confusion. Of course, those people should be, some of them should be blocked. Of course, that's also a comment. Then Benson saying that let the Kenyans decide. Let the Kenyans decide. Of course, those are some of the comments. They are the comments section. Of course, I would read all of them, but due to the time, we'll get to look at some, of course, next time. Thank you very much for staying with me, of course, throughout the briefer show. Of course, first beat, second beat, and even the third and the last beat. And now, of course, we are coming to the end of this particular show. Remember, there's still a lot that we are still following on, especially in the world of politics. Remember, beginning next week, campaigns will now be beginning officially. Political campaigns are set to begin officially as from next week. And so over the weekend, there are a lot to transpire. Of course, we'll be still following on these particular events, especially in the world of politics. Whatever shall unfold, whatever shall transpire, I'll be letting you know in the real time. Meanwhile, enjoy your weekend, and do not forget to join me once again on Monday exactly at 7 o'clock in the morning, of course, in the breakfast show. Meanwhile, continue staying tuned to Pure Africa TV, of course, even at the subsequent shows and programs that will follow. Do not miss even one, because we have a lot prepared for you at all time. For now, let me say goodbye, and remember to keep safe always.